I felt like I would waltz out of uni and walk into a pretty decent paying job and it was all going to be all right. And in the meantime, taking on the student debt, thinking it's all going to come out in the wash later. My first job was not super high paying and I did my first budget and I actually went home crying to my dad because I was so depressed about how little room there was in my budget.
Welcome to Checks and Balances, the Takeover. This is Jess and Makayla back with another episode. And today we're talking about how to get ahead in your 20s because we are both in our 30s and we learned a lot over the last few years. I think we might all be familiar with a certain meme, and I'm going to picture it out for you. So it's a picture of an ultrasound, baby in the womb, and it says, me wasting time in 1992 instead of buying a house.
I've also seen it with the baby like wrapped in a blanket. Like It's a newborn baby in a blanket, wasting time, not buying a house.
Yeah, so I think this kind of like spells out that, you know, a lot of people get to maybe their late 20s, early 30s and go, man, why did I waste so much time in my 20s and my teens, maybe even, you know, when I could have been making smart financial decisions that would have set me up for this stage of my life.
Definitely. Yeah. And so we're hoping to give you a couple of tools, wealth building tools for your 20s. You know, we are in our 30s now and 30s.
Ew.
We are.
Don't say that out loud. Cut that out.
we're in our 30s now and have learned a couple lessons along the way. So hoping to impart the wisdom onto you.
And also just like caveat, everything in here applies no matter what your age is.
True.
Like if you are listening to this and you're like, damn, I'm 35, I'm going to turn this off. Still listen because there's valuable stuff in here for anybody.
Okay, let's start by hitting you with some stats. So student loan debt. The average student loan balance in New Zealand as of 2022 is 24 grand.
I think that's lower than I would have thought.
I agree. I also do think though that we, or at least my generation of people that were going through uni, took out student loans without thinking a whole lot about
like, oh, I have to pay this back.
Yeah. Or maybe it could be the school I went to or the conversations people have about uni, but it sort of felt like uni was just the next thing to do. And we didn't really get into discussion, especially at school level. There was not really a discussion of what it meant to have the debt and how long it might take to pay it off and all that.
Because it's still debt, I think. Like, you know, not everyone has the means to pay for school straight out of pocket, of course. So that's the first option. But it is still debt.
And it is interest-free, which is fantastic.
Yes.
And we're very lucky to have that in New Zealand, but debt nonetheless. So, let's come to that.
Consumer and personal debt. So this stat here says 1 in 6 young adults are at risk of over-indebtedness. And this comes from things like buy now, pay later services, credit cards, probably vehicle loans, I would say.
Yeah, personal loans in general.
Yeah, personal loans. Just trying to get ahead, you know, show off that lifestyle.
That's right. And these things are a trap and a rabbit hole and you just don't do it. Don't do it. We'll come to that as well. But they're so popular now, especially the afterpays and all that sort of thing. And I get it. You go to check out and they kind of pop up with this thing like, you don't have to pay for this now. You can pay for it over 4 weeks, spread the cost. And in a way, I can get how that might make sense to somebody who's sort of living you know, with week to week or with a lower salary. Like it does feel appealing, but let's get to that.
So why does this happen? How does it happen? It's financial literacy, which is why we're trying to improve financial literacy across New Zealand.
Exactly. So if you don't know, managing money can be really difficult. And so hopefully these are a couple of tools that will help you build wealth, avoid these traps, and come out into your 30s a bit better off than everyone else. Okay, so what do we do?
Okay, so a little budgeting tip. We've got the 50-30-20 budgeting rule, which can be a really basic kind of guideline to follow for your income flow. So 50% of your income to your needs, 30%.
What's a need?
Oh, okay, backtrack.
Yeah, what's a need?
Need is your housing costs, you know, your rent, maybe your mortgage if you've got one.
Yep.
Property insurance, contents insurance.
Bills like Internet perhaps is probably a need. Mobile
yeah, I
phone.
would call your phone a need these days.
I think so these days. If you're part of society, you need phone and an internet these days.
The things that keep you, functioning and keep your life together.
Yeah, those are the needs.
Yeah, then you have your wants. So what are some wants?
Handbags. Holidays is a big one. That's a want.
Festivals.
Coffees. Coffee's not a need.
Avocado toast.
Yeah, no. these are all of our wants. So our fun stuff.
Yeah, so that's 30% to your wants.
Mm-hmm. But if you haven't already, go check out our episode about how a financial advisor budgets their money, because actually our wants at the moment are a heck of a lot lower than 30%, which we found interesting.
Mm-hmm. And then the last one, 20% of your income should be going to your savings or your investments if you are at a stage where you're investing funds.
Or it could be going towards paying down additional debt if that's part of your plan.
That's true. But hopefully it's not. We're going to help you avoid that.
Yeah, let's say long-term goals, 20%. Yeah.
Yeah. And so with the budgeting rule, you also have to be really conscious of lifestyle creeps. What is lifestyle creep, Jess?
Yeah, so what that means is when people start to, especially through your 20s, right? Like you come out of uni or tertiary study or high school, whatever it is, and start working. And then as you progress through your career, you get these pay increases. And rather than like having this rule of thumb gives you a guideline to kind of stick to, whereas people get a pay rise and that just goes straight back into their wants category. So their wants category creeps up and up and up because they're going, oh, pay rise, fun stuff, as opposed to being quite intentional about how they distribute that extra money. So lifestyle creep is the more you get paid, the more you spend on fun stuff, and you've got to be really careful of it because we see it a lot.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of people, almost majority, fall victim to lifestyle creep at some point.
You see people that like, obviously we have clients that earn a lot of money and sometimes they're spending all of it. Like they're not actually getting ahead. They're going backwards.
And even the people that make tons of money and you'd be like, well, of course you make tons of money, so you must be saving heaps and, investing heaps. But
not the case.
Nah, they're just buying Gucci tracksuits and stuff.
Yeah, the problem with this is that if you're not at least funneling some of your surplus back into wealth building, you're just always going to be on this treadmill. So you're always going to be having to work for the paycheck to fund your lifestyle, and round you go. If you are funneling some of your money into those long-term goals and building wealth, eventually you reach financial freedom. So you work because you want to, not because you have to. So that's what we're aiming for.
And I also feel like, so for us, when we were in our early 20s, social media, like it did exist, but it wasn't as like hardcore as it is now. And I feel like if I was, 25 now and you're seeing all of these influencers that are living these like insane lifestyles, like traveling, buying everything, and it's just crazy, and you like are comparing your life to that. So I feel like you could fall into that lifestyle creep even more because you're like encouraged mentally to do that.
Definitely. I think a good example of this is cars and car loans. So we bought our car cash. We just buy it up front. I don't drive a super flash car. We spent 10 grand on it, and that is our run around day-to-day car. I could drive past somebody who's driving a $100,000 car, but actually it's all on tick and they're paying it off on a loan. And it's so funny because from the outside, you would look at me and that person and be like, oh, they're doing way better. They're way better off. But actually they don't necessarily own that car and I own mine. So it's just funny. You've got to keep in the back of your mind when you see all this stuff happening around you, a lot of these things are actually debt.
Yeah, it's very true. Like when I was, actually this memory came up on my Facebook the other day. I bought my first Mini Cooper when I was 21. I put it on a car loan. It was a great car. I loved it, but I bought it, I couldn't technically afford it. I think the payments were like $600 a month or something. And I was like working at an auto parts shop, but I fell into that trap of like, I wanted to drive the flashy car.
And it's particularly common in Canada.
Yeah, I'd say it's way more common in Canada for people to take out car loans, like no matter their income level. Like pretty much anyone I saw driving a nice car had it on tick. Like, and I'm saying that from working in a bank.
Yeah, it is crazy. I wish someone told me that in my 20s. Like, you're going to see all this flashy stuff. Don't assume that those people can actually afford the stuff.
Completely. What are like some ways that you can avoid the lifestyle creep? We've got in here. So I feel like this is a bit of a maybe some people will feel a certain way about this, but living with your parents as long as possible to avoid the high housing costs.
And this is not for everyone. For some people, getting out of your parents' house is top priority, top of the list. Yes. You're saying that from experience. I did live with my parents for as long as I could until we moved away to travel. So it allowed us to save up, to move overseas, and that worked really well for us. There was enough space for everybody and we weren't stepping on each other's toes, because I know as you enter your 20s, you want to be a little bit more independent. Yes. And you are at risk of that.
Yeah, but the biggest expense in your budget is probably going to be rent at that age. And so if we look at the median rent in New Zealand as of last year, 2024, $600 per week for a 2-bedroom apartment. Mm-hmm. Of course, you can probably get a flatmate in there to help you with that cost. But if you stay living at home for 2 years, that's a potential savings of about $20,000 a year, and which is massive.
Yeah, totally. Like that. Think of what you could do with that 20 grand. And, you know, even if you were paying your parents some board, it's not usually going to be as much as if you go out on your own. And some parents, you know, I know a lot of people that do financial plans with us want to help their kids get a head start. Mm-hmm. And the way that they do that is allow them to live at home, you know, and save money and so long as they're being responsible. So yeah, living at home with your parents could be a smart move if it's viable for you.
I had a friend in high school, and when we graduated high school, his parents immediately started charging him board, like literally the day after graduation. Yeah. And I think he stayed at home for about 2 years. Oh. And he was paying this board to his parents, and it wasn't that cheap either. But what his parents actually had done was they'd put it all in an account. Oh. And when he finally moved out of the house, they gave him all the money back.
And he didn't know?
No, he had no idea. God. But it was cool because, like, you know, they taught him that.
That's awesome.
You know, this is how you budget for your living costs, but at the same time didn't impact his future.
Wow, that's so cool. Yeah, nice. I remember my parents started charging me board when I started working full time. Like when I was studying, it was all good, and then as soon as I started working full time, that's when the board kicked in. But I came out of uni and sort of expected, and this is probably another thing to just bear in mind if you're studying, and especially if you're getting a degree and taking on that student debt, I felt like I would waltz out of uni and walk into a pretty decent paying job and it was all going to be all right. And in the meantime, taking on the student debt, thinking it's all going to come out in the wash later. Mm-hmm. Actually, I left uni, and some people, especially studying, like if you're doing law or medicine or anything like that, it's probably different. But, you know, my first job was not super high paying, and I did my first budget, and I actually went home crying to my dad because I was so depressed about how little room there was in my budget. Like I was just thinking this was all going to be okay, but potentially for some people out there in their 20s, there's going to be a period where it's still going to be pretty tight. Yeah. And keeping that in mind, I think, is important, especially when it comes to taking on that additional debt.
Okay, so how can we be smart with debt if we have debt?
Yeah, if you're at a point where you've already ticked up some debt, there's a couple of different approaches to knocking through debt. And we actually talked about this with Tracy in her story in a podcast last year. But the one that mathematically makes more sense is paying down your high interest debt off first.
Yes.
So mathematically, that is the best thing to do. Psychologically, it might be better to start with your smallest debts first and get rid of them. What are they called? Snowball and avalanche.
There's two names. It's avalanche method or the snowball method.
Which is which?
Snowball is when you start with the smallest debt and you get larger as you go on, which, like you said, psychologically makes more sense because it
feels better.
It's easier to do because you're targeting the smallest thing first. And once you get, you know, you go, I've paid off 1, I've paid off 2, I've paid off 3, like you feel really good about it. However, paying off the highest interest actually makes sense. Like, for example, if you have a GEM visa and you're in that little interest-free period, but you've also got a maxed out credit card that's at 20% interest, it probably makes more sense to pay off the maxed out credit card at 20%.
Yeah, definitely. Now, the next one we want to talk about is the student loan. So remember that this is going to be interest-free so long as you stay in New Zealand. So I went overseas for 8 years you get a repayment holiday of a year. So I didn't have to make repayments onto my student loan for that period of time. But your repayments do kick off after that, and you're earning interest the whole time. So I'd say a student loan is a funny one because whilst it is interest free, and if you don't plan on being overseas at all, then maybe you're not rushing to pay that off, and that's fine. But I didn't plan. We went over to London thinking we'll be 1 or 2 years. 8 years later, I come back. And so that obviously has an impact. So just keep all of that stuff in the back of your mind when you're deciding whether to study and take a student loan out, the long-term impact that's going to have.
Yeah, or if you are thinking, you know what, I'm definitely going to go overseas, to make a plan for, when you do come back to New Zealand, how are you going to tackle that?
Yeah. And I think what this comes down to is probably the advice that I would give someone in their 20s is if you are taking on the student debt, do it intentionally, like go to uni with an intention of what you want to achieve from it, as opposed to doing it just because it's the next thing to do and you're trying to figure it out.
Which is a difficult decision to make.
So hard, yeah.
I went to uni and I was like, I'll do a degree in art history because I love art. I didn't want to go to art school because I was like, you can't make money as a painter. But maybe, I could do something in the art history space. I did not take out any student loans because I just was a little bit unsure, and I'm very glad that I didn't because I didn't end up finishing that degree. Obviously, I don't work in art history. And if I had have taken out, $30,000 in tuition loans, I would have not done anything with it. I didn't finish the degree. It was just kind of money in the sink. But in order to counterbalance that, I had to work full time as well as going to school. So it was quite chaotic.
Yeah, it's full on. Yeah, so thinking through all those decisions, not just doing it because everyone else is doing it and it's the next step to do. The next thing to be clever about is increasing your income streams and financial education. So I do have people approach us even now in their 20s looking at financial planning and budgeting and things like that. And even though a holistic plan might not be right for them right this minute, it's amazing and awesome to see people just aware of this stuff and conscious of it. So if you're listening to this, you're probably already on that pathway and thinking about how to build wealth, how to gain more education around all of this stuff. So you're already on the right track. But just bringing in awareness to all of these topics is really going to help you over the long term as well. So the more you can learn, the more you can consume on that side of things, the better, I think.
Yeah. And I think, we've talked previously about the side hustle. If you're, in uni and you're trying to make a little bit of extra income, if you can find something that works out for you well, like great, that's an extra way to get ahead. But, also be conscious of not falling into like the work from home, work as a coach, scam
There's
trap.
so many out there, especially on Instagram. Like, what do they say? Do you want to work from home, make $1,000 a week?
Yeah. Airbnb arbitrage. And the guy's like in a Porsche or something and he's like 19 years old.
Yeah. I always say if it seems too good to be true, it probably is.
Most definitely.
No good. So starting saving towards goals and or investing ASAP. Why do we recommend getting on this train as soon as we can? And that comes back to what I said earlier about if you are on the treadmill of life and spending all of the money that you're earning, you're always going to be reliant on that pay to come in for you to live your life. If we're funneling some of that money away towards our long-term goals, the sooner we can start doing that, the better. And you're going to start benefiting from compound interest. So starting small is fine. It's going to make a difference over the long term, even if it's just $5 a week, $10 a week, that automatically leaves your bank account into whatever it is, savings or investments, then you're on the right track.
Yeah. And this goes to emergency fund as well. Like the savings account, you don't have to be doing like gigantic investments in your 20s, but you should be making sure you've got a bit of savings for emergencies or for, I don't know, maybe a trip to Mexico with your mates.
Well, we normally say...
You guys don't really go to Mexico, do you?
No. The emergency fund thing, we normally say 3 to 6 months of expenses. And I think in your 20s, that can be a really big ask, if you're just starting out your career and maybe not making as much money as you'd like. But an emergency fund could start off at $1,000 even.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think if I had $1,000 in savings in my 20s, that would have saved me many times, but I never did.
Yeah. So being aware of that in your budget. And when it comes to investment options for young Kiwis, I think one of the main ones that is maybe a little misunderstood or not consciously thought about very often is our KiwiSaver. So that just, people sign up and they tick a box on their first day of work and go, oh yeah, and then this money starts building up in the background. If you're not making an active choice in your fund or provider, you don't know what that money's for, then you could be missing out on a heck of a lot of money over the long term. So, making sure that you've spoken to somebody about what's the right fund and provider for me is really, really important.
Yeah. And those government contributions. Free money. Yeah. Who doesn't love free money?
Totally. People don't know about this. We should touch on that. The benefits of KiwiSaver are employer contributions. So an employer will match your contributions. They have to do 3%. So 3% of your salary going straight into those savings is awesome. Some employers do even more. So if you can afford to match those employer contributions, then definitely do. And then for it's like $1,000 and something dollars. Every $1,000 you contribute in the year, the government will give you $521. It's a bit odd,
which
the numbers.
Is great.
Free money. Yeah, straight into your KiwiSaver. Reminder that you can use a KiwiSaver for retirement or a first home deposit. So for people in their 20s, that's probably the first home deposit is probably more relevant.
Okay, so what about you start working, you're in your first job out of university, but you need to be making more income because you have maybe a student loan to pay.
Yeah.
Then what happens? You've got to negotiate your salary.
Yep. You've got an emergency fund to build.
Yeah.
So, this is definitely a skill that I think people learn throughout their 20s, and the sooner you can get better at it, the better, is asking for a fair salary. So, and women and Kiwis are especially bad at this. I think when I moved to London, I could not believe the way that men, but also everyone there is so easy at talking about money, and it's just very matter of fact, and people don't feel uncomfortable about it. So I think get comfortable with that conversation, because the two things we always say, if you don't ask, you don't get. And what's the worst they can say?
No.
That's it.
No one's going to fire you for asking for a pay increase.
Yeah. And I think there's a way to go about it. Like you don't just rock on up to your boss and go, give me more.
Certainly not.
You know, Matt and James and Mike are probably listening to this like, shut up. But I think, if you're in a role where, and you've got to do your research, like look at other jobs that are similar to yours. Are those paying more right now in the market? Do you actually deserve more is the first question. The next thing you do is go, well, if I was them, why would I give me a pay rise?
Yeah.
And write it down. Be like, whether it's your stats or your, I'm doing extra time here, I'm taking extra responsibilities on here, I'm meeting all my targets there, whatever it is, come up with your reasons for why you deserve a pay rise. Sit down with your boss and, set aside some time. Be like, hey, can I have a conversation with you, have regular catch-ups or whatever it is? Be like, just ask the question. I've looked at other jobs in the market that are similar as mine. This is what they're getting paid. The reasons I deserve a pay rise or this sort of salary is this. Can you do that? Yeah.
I think it can be like such a scary conversation. I was so scared of asking for pay rises for years. In fact, I don't think I ever really asked for a pay rise at a job until I was maybe like past the age of 26 because it was just so scary. I was like, whatever you give me, I'll just take it.
Yeah.
But it is a learned skill. And like Jess said, you do need to, prove your case a little bit. You can't just sit down and be like, I want $100,000 a year because I think so. What are you doing for the company? But just do it, because if you don't ask, no one's going to give it to you. And especially when you're fresh into your career, I think a lot of places will go, oh, well, you're just out of uni. You're just a baby. You're just
starting. You are going to take what you can get.
Exactly. Yeah. You'll just take. But don't ask, don't get.
Don't ask, don't get, but be realistic.
Yes. Yeah.
And I think, like I said, women in particular are pretty bad at underrating themselves. So we found a study that showed that women set their salary expectations $14,000 lower than men on average. So across a lifetime or even across a decade in your 20s, that can make a pretty big difference.
Yes, completely.
All right, shall we wrap up with our final thoughts?
Final thoughts on this episode. Number 1, avoiding financial traps. We talked about the car loans. We've always talked about the buy now, pay later, and the unnecessary debt.
Avoid it where you can.
Yes. And I actually just want to add one thing to this, which I think we mentioned once in an episode a while back, but I'm going to say it again. You do not need a credit card to build your credit score in New Zealand. It's not a thing. Anyone that's telling you you need to take out a credit card because you need to build your credit score. It's not true.
It's not true.
You don't need it.
Spread the word.
Spread the word. It's an American thing.
Take it from her. Okay, next one, maximizing income potential. So negotiating, upskilling, and side hustles, if that's where you're at in life.
Tentative on the side hustle.
Yeah. Reducing major expenses. So living at home as long as you can, put together a budget. That stuff's really important.
Lastly, choose your education wisely, considering the ROI on your education or your degree. You know, we talked heaps about the student loans and making sure that that career choice kind of balances it out.
When we say ROI, we mean return on investment. Important. All right. Thanks so much. Don't forget to like, review, and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.
Bye.